G'day everyone, so in this episode I want to talk about some mods you can do to your car to stop it from overheating, specifically cars with a 1kZ motor. It's always a good idea to start cheap. If you're having overheating issues, start with the simple things and then work your way up. Now it's worth saying that these are supporting mods or cooling mods, whatever you want to call them. If you are planning on running more power, more boost, more fuel, or not, either way, these are going to be the best cooling mods for you. So whatever the reason your car might be overheating, we'll start with the basics. If you're living in a hot climate, or you're towing, or your car is heavy, these are all going to be factors in why your car is overheating. But to combat that, you just want to start with the basics. You want to have a good baseline. So service your car. You want to do your air filters, fuel filters, oil. Make sure your injectors are in good condition. If they're not, get them rebuilt or replace them. And if your car's done a fair few kilometers, anything over 300,000 kilometers, you should be looking at getting your fuel pump rebuilt. Make sure your radiator is clean inside and out. If you go forward driving, it could be full of mud. It could be restricting airflow through your radiator. And if it's old, give it a good flush, give it a good clean out inside, and make sure there's no blockages or anything like that. That's a good way to start to diagnose any overheating issues. Some other things that will need attention potentially are your thermostat and your radiator cap. Your radiator cap's actually pretty cheap to swap out, and if it's not operating properly, it could be causing air to be locked in the system, so make sure you change that every so often. I mean, it's that cheap, why wouldn't you? Now, just on thermostats as well, you can buy ones that open at a colder temperature. I think the factory ones open at around 83 degrees Celsius. And you can buy some that open in the high 70s, which could actually make a difference. Now, another thing that might need maintenance is your fan hub. There is a fluid inside of that, a silicone fluid, and you can replace that fluid, and it may correct how your fan hub operates, especially in older vehicles. And you can also replace them with new and genuine ones. I've replaced mine with a brand new one. It was about 230 bucks. My car wasn't overheating, but I did notice that the fan hub was a bit stiff. I replaced it and now it's operating properly. I'm actually getting better fuel economy because of it. Now, there are variants in these motors. Some of the older ones came with a 7-blade fan. The Hilux behind me actually came with a 10-blade fan. So check that you have a 10-blade fan, and if you don't, upgrade it to a 10-blade fan. That's going to go a long way to helping cooling as well. I bought one for 50 bucks, even though I didn't end up needing it. They are pretty affordable. Now, I have made a separate video with more detail about those fans and fan hubs, so feel free to check that out. You might get more information there if you're curious about that. Now, the next thing you want to be doing is actually monitoring what's going on with your temperatures. There is a factory coolant gauge, and that is just a needle that says hot or cold. It doesn't actually tell you how hot or how cold your coolant is, so I would actually get an aftermarket water temperature gauge and sensor, and make sure you're getting an accurate readout of how hot your coolant is. Now, while we're on gauges as well, you want to install an EGT gauge. EGT stands for exhaust gas temperatures. The thing with exhaust gas temperatures is you can actually have high EGTs for a short window, and it won't be reflected in your coolant temperatures. You want to be making sure your EGTs are actually not getting too high, because that is the temperature closest to the internals of the engine. And if your exhaust gas temperatures are reaching such high amounts, you could be reaching temperatures where you start to melt things in the engine, like your pistons and things like that, which you don't want to be melting. So that is one of the best things you can monitor, is your exhaust gas temperatures. And if they're obviously getting too high, you have an issue, and there are a few things you can do to reduce those exhaust gas temperatures if the previous things haven't worked for you. Now, the exhaust systems on these cars are pretty restrictive. The manifold itself as well. It's a pretty extreme mod to replace the manifold. If you're going to replace the manifold, you should probably get a more modern turbo, but I'm not going to recommend that. I think you should just stick with a upgraded exhaust from the turbo back, including a 3-inch dump and a full 3-inch system. I've heard a lot about these things working wonders, and I myself have a 3-inch exhaust on my car, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, another thing you can do is a snorkel. That might help reduce your air intake temperatures. It's worked pretty well for me in conjunction with some other things. I also made my own airbox, and I also relocated that airbox to the other side of the car, and I go into more detail with that in a different video that I've made, which details my intercooler setup, snorkel and airbox. So I'll leave a link below, and you can check that video out for yourselves. Now the next thing to do would be an intercooler. This car behind me never came with an intercooler. I know that some Surfs and some Prados do come with a factory top mount, and if you do have one of them, make sure you're doing everything you can to push as much air through that intercooler. If you don't have a hood scoop, get one, and maybe you could put some fans and some ducting on to force more air through that top mount intercooler. But for me, I've got a water to air intercooler. I just found it easier to package and install, and as I said, there's a video already detailing that, but I do recommend that before spending big money on a upgraded radiator. Now you can get alloy radiators. I tried buying one and the outlets were in the wrong spot, so I didn't end up using it. I did see that Legend X made one, but it was $1,000, and I just thought I would get more for my money out of an intercooler, and that's why I went with that instead of an alloy radiator. The factory radiators in these cars are actually pretty big, and if they're well maintained, there's nothing wrong with them. Just make sure it's clean, and instead of buying a $1,000 radiator, maybe spend your money on an intercooler setup. Now there is a channel called Boosted and Built Garage, and that guy does a lot of work on his Surf, and he does have some other cars come in with the same motor, the 1KZ, and I noticed that he put a radiator that was originally from a KZM 165 Hilux. He managed to fit a radiator out of a car like mine and put it into an older generation Hilux Surf, and for him that was an upgrade as well. So if you do have Hilux Surf, check out his videos, and there's a bit of information there about how he went about fitting a bigger factory radiator from a different car in his older Hilux Surf. Now there is another thing you can do depending on what fuel pump you have. If you've got an older style fuel pump, you can do the resistor mod, or the correction mod as you might know it. I have done a video detailing how to do that, and I've seen testimonials of people actually reducing their EGTs just by doing the resistor mod, which could only cost you a few cents, to be honest. So I've got more information about the resistor mod in a separate video. I'll leave a link to that video as well below, so check that out. Now lastly, there are things you can do to your car that aren't engine related that can reduce the rolling resistance of your car. Now these things can give you better fuel economy and also just reduce the load on your engine. Things like freewheeling hubs, lightweight wheels, all kinds of things that reduce rolling resistance and weight, especially spinning weight. What's the word for that? Spinning weight. Rotating mass. So there are things you can do to reduce rotating mass. Freewheeling hubs are great because they stop your CVs from spinning all the time. It just unlocks the CV from the front wheel, and then the only thing spinning is your wheel instead of your wheel and your CV. So those are a good thing to do. They're going to increase your fuel economy, reduce the wear on your CVs, and yeah, reduce the load on your engine. And with reducing the load on your engine as well, just make sure all your pulleys and your bearings, like your idler bearings and all those kinds of things, are not seized, they're operating correctly. If your bearings are binding up, especially on your belts and things like that, that's obviously going to give your engine a harder time, and the harder it works, the hotter it's going to get. Now not only are the bearings in your pulleys and things important, but your wheel bearings as well. If your wheel bearings are worn out and they're binding up, obviously you want to get those replaced, and once again reduce the rolling resistance of the car overall. Now there is one extreme thing that I did do, and that was before I installed the intercooler, but I ended up drilling a fair few holes in my front grille to try and increase airflow through the front end of the car. I also cut away the center section and put my own kind of mesh in, and then later when I did install the intercooler, I once again had to modify that grille to get it to fit over the heat exchanger at the front. It is pretty extreme. I know a lot of people out there don't want to go hacking up their car just for a bit of airflow, but for me, that was something I was willing to do, and I think it looks pretty good, so I'm happy with the results of that. And if it's something you're not too scared to do or you're not worried about, yeah, give it a go yourselves. And just on airflow as well, I've chosen not to put any extra spotlights or light bars mounted to the bull bar, especially in front of the radiator. There's a bit of controversy around that, but for me, all I have is a light bar on the roof, and that gives me more than enough light when I need it, and frees up the front end of the car for the maximum amount of airflow over the radiator and the intercooler. So that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for sticking around. I will be making another video detailing performance modifications in regards to engine performance, four-wheel drive performance. I'll also be touching bases on fuel economy and reliability, not just from your engine but from the car overall, and I'll be using the things that I've done to my car as an example of that. So I'll give you a little bit of a walk around, and yeah, I'll explain some more things, but for now, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to see the videos, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.